Okay, if we could just ask folks to come in and get seated, we'll get started in a minute. I don't know if we're quite live, but we're just trying to bring up one of our panelists who will be virtual, Kelsey, Leonard. So as soon as she comes up and we're set to go, we will kick this session off. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Again, I am Tony MacDonald. I am not Avalon Bristow, as you can see. And so again, I am going to pick up. Unfortunately, Avalon had a family issue that she needed to take care of and is unable to join us today, but she sends her regards. And as soon as we get Kelsey up, we will get going. Appreciate it. We good? Hopefully folks who are online, I don't know if we're live or not, but can they hear us? We're live. So we're just waiting to get Kelsey in the room, so to speak. All right. 1, 2, 3. Say that again. There's Kelsey. Welcome, Kelsey. Thank you very much for joining us. So we're just about to get underway, and again, as I said, I'm Tony MacDonald, who's facilitating this meeting, and I'm stepping in for Avalon Bristow for sort of keying off this session on tribal data. Really, this is an issue that we have been working on for a long time in the Mid-Atlantic, thanks a lot to leadership from Kelsey and others and our Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal team, so you'll hear something about that. But I really also wanted to pick up on some of the observations from this morning's sessions about how important it is to really be thinking about engaging with tribal and indigenous communities around these issues as well as others. So really, Avalon wants to thank you for joining us today. Before we get off, I want to also talk to you a little bit before we introduce the speakers about what Marco is doing. So really, this is an issue that the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean has been working on for a while, and they're trying to actually elevate their engagement. As many of you know, data and oceans and coasts use really forms the foundation for how we do regional ocean planning in this region. It helps us understand what's there, what needs to be there, and to set priorities about how we engage communities and think about what our planning priorities are. It's important that data we use in coastal and ocean planners is inclusive, comprehensive, and as updated as possible, both looking to the past and looking to the future. It includes ensuring that tribal interests and traditional knowledge are reflected in the data we use in ocean planning by increasing capacity for tribes to join the regional ocean planning table. And that's capacity done with them, not for them, and thinking about engaging them in ways that are fully inclusive and consider tribal knowledge as well as physical and geographical data. We really, over the next 2 years, Marco, and Avalon is the executive director of Marco, using the funding that they've gotten through the bipartisan infrastructure funding to update Marco's tribal lists of contacts and invest in building relationships with tribes in the region. And we heard in our first panel how important it is to be thinking about building that trust and those relationships around over time and showing commitment not only to your specific project, but working forward in the future. We're reducing barriers to tribal participation in meetings by providing funding specifically for members of tribes to attend any Marco event. So we'll be sure we're enabling that based on their ability and the opportunities that we can provide to expand those partnerships. During this session, we're going to hear about tribal data already on the Mid-Atlantic portal. So we'll start out with Karl Vilacoba, who's our first speaker, to talk about the work that we have been doing already within the context of the portal. And we're hearing by actually, it's actually 3.5 other panelists as well, because one of them will be virtually embedded into certain presentations. So we're here very much. We're pleased that we have folks from the Bureau of Indian Affairs joining us to talk about the work they're doing, and one of our partners in the portal, but also a partner from Ecotrust who's working with several tribal entities out in the West Coast as well. And we'll conclude the presentations today with some concluding remarks from our virtual presenter on the screen, Kelsey, Leonard. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Karl Vilacoba. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And just before I get going, just want to say that it's a real privilege to be on this particular panel in this venue, the Museum of the American Indian, And I'm just thankful to be here and talk on this topic. So my name is Karl Vilacoba, and I am the project manager for the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal and the communications director for the Monmouth University Urban Coast Institute, which is located on the Jersey Shore. I joined the portal about 6+ years ago as its communications lead. And on one of my first days on the job, I went to a Mid-Atlantic RPB meeting, which was the precursor of MACO. And there I met Kelsey Leonard, who was, I believe, also having her first meeting as the tribal co-lead of the RPB. And on that day, I interviewed her for a profile I did on the portal blog about her and her interests in ocean planning. And one of the questions I asked was, what data, what tool enhancements, what can we do on the portal to make it more useful, more interesting for tribal users? And I watched that video back as I was getting ready for this presentation, and here are a few of the things that she said. Number one, we needed data that was specific to tribal interests and priorities to spark that initial interest in users and serve as kind of a gateway that would draw users to explore other content on the portal and use it more. So for example, a tribal user who sees the tribal headquarters layer on the portal might then also take some time to look at the marine mammal data and get a better sense of everything that's on the site. I heard that we needed to add information that would help improve communication between tribes and government agencies. So when there's a proposed ocean use off the coast, the coordinating agency could use the portal to find out who the tribal representatives are in that area that they should talk to, and vice versa. We needed maps that showed which tribes were culturally tied to the areas along our coast and held historic spheres of influence in those areas. And with the release of our Indigenous Nations, Communities, and Cultures map collection just last year, I'm happy to say that we made great progress on all of those counts. The collection contains 6 interactive maps that can assist with ocean planning and improve awareness of the region's deep American Indian heritage and history. 2 of those maps were created by the Indigenous-led nonprofit organization Native Land Digital. They were gracious enough to grant us permission to add these maps to the portal, and I encourage you to check out that site, which is native-land.ca, when you have a chance, to see all of what they have to offer. And I also need to acknowledge Kelsey's guidance and creative thinking throughout the process in helping put all of this together, which was essential. Here you see the first of our Native Land digital maps, Historic Native Terrestrial Territories. This map shows the approximate historic territories of Indigenous peoples in this area where we stand today. Users can click any territory for a pop-up containing links for more information about the communities in those areas on Native Land Digital. One caveat, this does not represent current tribal reservation boundaries of any kind or government regulated boundaries. Now you see the languages spoken by Indigenous peoples in this same area, and users can once again click on the polygons for pop-ups containing links for more about the languages from the areas on Native Land Digital. And here we have 2 of our contact information maps. The first is the Tribal Leaders Directory, which is published by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a map service that we're ingesting directly from BIA, so anytime that there's a change made on their end, it reflects automatically on our site. Also seen here is a simple map we made for the EPA Regional Tribal Operations Committee, or RTOC representatives in the regions. During our brainstorming on the collection, Kelsey had expressed that the RTOC reps are seen as go-to people for environmental issues in these regions. And we were able to develop this map pretty simply, thanks to Ryan's help too, by adding the names of the RTOCs to the attributes so people can click on the zone and find out who the proper person is there to talk to. And the orange points that you see on the map are the tribal leaders. So click on any of them, you'll find out who the leadership of that tribal nation is and how to get a hold of them. Seen here with the teal points are the tribal headquarters, which were created and maintained by the portal team. And that marks the official address for both state and federally recognized tribes in the 5 Marco states, whereas the BIA one focuses strictly on federally recognized. And the polygons in that area are the American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas. That is a US Census map that shows both federal and state reservations, state-designated tribal statistical areas, and other classifications that are important and used around the nation. And finally, not officially part of that collection in any way, but certainly relevant to this discussion, is our Ocean Stories profile on Lenape Indian Tribe of Delaware Principal Chief Dennis White Owl Coker. If you haven't seen the Ocean Stories, they're kind of a story map meets digital magazine feature. And in this particular one, I talked to him to find out what ocean planning issues mattered most to him and his people, and about their relationship with the ocean. I do hope to do a lot more in our Ocean Stories section as the portal, or as Marco proceeds with its tribal outreach as described by Tony earlier, and that opens some new doors for us. And finally, I'll note that the addition of these maps is really just one step in Marco and Mako's efforts to incorporate data that better reflects the region's diversity and addresses the needs of stakeholders from a wider set of backgrounds and industries. And we're always open to hear ideas from all of you on how we can do that. And with that, I'll just note I'll be out with the portal stand for today and tomorrow during break, so feel free to come talk to me at any time during the session. Thank you.
Osio, Dohiju. My name's Deborah Kirk. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And I just want to say hello and to all of you attendees. This is my first time here, so I'm excited to be here. I am the Regional Geospatial Coordinator for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Eastern Region. We're based out in Nashville. Eastern Region has a very large territory, but I actually remote work from Oklahoma because that's where my tribe is. So first, just a little bit about me. I've been working in GIS since 2008. That was my first introduction when I was a student at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. Since then, I've gotten my master's at University of Kansas, and I'm ABD at West Virginia. At some point, I hope to finish my dissertation. But life happens and it gets in the way, so we'll see what happens. So today's presentation, we will be going over just kind of how BIA is structured for GIS, the different departments, who handles what, so that those of you who are interested in getting data know who to go to and at what level maybe we can share it, and I'll go into more detail later. So first I want to start out with the Division of Resource and Integration Services. This division was actually created last fall. Well, it's been in the works for a while, but it came to fruition last fall. At the BIA, we had GIS folks, but they were siloed into the field offices, at the regional offices. Data was siloed. Nobody knew who had what, and there was really no overarching plan. And so they created, the central office tried to create some programs to kind of bring us all together, but it wasn't really until the Division of Resources and Integration Services was formed this past fall that they are now kind of bringing GIS under not a single umbrella, but the idea of having GIS in the Bureau into a focused, more integrated plan with implementation plan in place, which is really important. You know, how to get a national standard for BIA, how to get data standards, period, for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, how to meet the needs of GIS and get GIS work integrated into areas of the Bureau that it had never been integrated in before. So that is their whole focus. And they are now, they're the division, and so underneath them is the branch of Geospatial Support, Geodata, well, I can't remember the other acronym. As you all know, federal governments love acronyms, and I get them all confused. I'll get there in just a minute. So DRIS formed, and this is their strategy, and it's a lot of words, and you guys can all have access to this presentation when I'm finished. You can email me if, I don't know if you guys are making them public. Okay, but if you don't get it, just email me. My email's at the end, and I'll get it to you that way. But Chid Murphy, he is the division chief, amazing person. He came out of, I think he was with USGS maybe, and then came over to BIA. He's a citizen of the Choctaw Nation. So this is Geodata Examination and Validation. They are also a newer branch that developed, and they are under DRIS directly, and they take care of all of the fee-to-trust mapping. So when a tribe wants to put land into trust, all of that information is packaged by the real estate team at the regional office, and then it goes to GDev for mapping. So they do all of that kind of mapping, and then they also will eventually work on trust easements and trust right-of-ways. So they are all over the United States as well. Most of them, I think, work remote because they're assisting various regions in the fee-to-trust endeavors. Again, a bunch of information. You guys can look at it on your own. But these are the main folks involved. TJ is the acting branch chief right now. They don't have the branch chief actually stepped down and went into LTRO. Some of you are aware of what that means. Land Trust and Records Office, I think is what it's called. So he's over there. So TJ is now acting. Trish Cashlin is a GIS specialist. She works on special projects for them for the most part. And then Brandon and Marlon and also TJ, they do all of the fee-to-trust mapping. Okay, so the next part of DRIS is the branch of Geospatial Support. You guys may know them as BOGs if you've had any interaction with them. At one point for the BIA, the only people at central office who did GIS was BOGs, and they were predominantly made up of contractors. And I don't know, I think contractors are excellent. They certainly knew what they were doing, but they didn't have the relationship with Indian country that was necessary to make GIS work. So they scaled back BOGs, and they focus now on their support, or what BOGs does primarily is support GIS for the tribes through the ELA, and for all of the employees for BIA. So they take care of the ELA. We get all of our licenses through them. They coordinate the trainings with Esri, and then they are anything at a national level. Like say EPA came to BIA and said, we need this. It would funnel through BOGs for GIS, and then they would parse it out to the regions to get the data that was requested, get it submitted to the central office, and then over to fulfill that request. The branch chief for BOGs is David Vogt. He came to us from the Census Bureau, and BOGs does work closely with the Census Bureau. Right now, many of you know we don't really have a good representation of lands in federal Indian country. So they work closely with the Census Bureau right now to get some of that mapping. What Census Bureau has already done, we use that. But we are working on, I should say, Boggs is working on a land area representation that's called the LAR. Some of you guys have seen that. That drew a lot of criticism in the past because tribes were not consulted. And so we're going to consultation in November with tribes for this GIS data and to show accurate representation and that has tribal approval. So just additional information for Boggs. One thing that we have now, thanks to Boggs, is we now have a portal system in place. We never had that before, and so now we have a portal system in place. It is kind of in transition because it's going to an AWS platform. But what that allows us to do now is, instead of our data siloed at individual areas, we can bring it into the portal and it can be managed at the national level, but then be able to be dispersed throughout the Bureau so that we all can have access to what's needed, whether, and it's anybody that's in the Bureau. It can, be fire, it can be real estate services, environmental folks, cultural resources. There may be a component of that, but you all know that archaeology data is kind of, heavily protected, and so we would want to make sure that there wasn't anything that was displayed or information given that shouldn't be. So, but all of those protections are now going to be in place, and that was never there before, so we're excited about that. As I stated before, Boggs is also the ones that reach out to the region through the RGCs. I'm an RGC. There's 12 regions within the BIA, so we work closely with Boggs when it comes to fulfilling data needs, and then also we reach out and we have our connection with our tribal folks and with the BIA employees who use GIS for training. We get out training information. We're showing people how to get, right now tribal folks can't get into our portal, but once we get to AWS, that will change and we'll be able to allow tribal folks into the portal. Okay, so now I'm going to get to the RGCs. That's me. Like I said, there's 12 of us. Well, there's 12 regions. Right now, we only have 9 RGCs. 9. We have 3 vacancies. So you can see all of the different regions that are up there. You can see how big Eastern region is. And that didn't, I don't know what happened to that slide, but the names were up there, maybe it's later, and it shows how many tribes are in each region and how many field agencies. So I think for my region, I have 34 tribes and 3 field agencies, and I think 1 we're reestablishing up in the Northeast. So again, like I said, with Boggs, we work closely with distributing the software, the licenses, the training, and then providing communication and assistance to the BIA employees and also to tribal employees. So for my region, I just recently created a GIS user forum for tribal employees who are GIS users and for BIA users. I was just a little bit disappointed. I was so excited to create that forum, and then I think I had 20 people respond and say, yeah, we want to join up. I was like, oh man, out of, I think there was like 120 people or something like that. It was a lot of people, but I was talking to Sephora, right? And she said, don't get discouraged. And so now I'm trying to brainstorm ways and trying to get everybody else. Maybe I think I'm just going to go ahead and just sign them up for the forum, and then get information out that way. Okay, we've covered that. These are the different geospatial coordinators for the region. Oh, it wasn't on the slide. It was on this one that shows you the different, how many tribes are in each area, and then how many agencies they serve. But one thing I wanted to say when it comes to tribal entities and GIS, you've got extremely sophisticated tribes and GIS, and then you have really small tribes that maybe have one person or one part-time person that knows a little bit about GIS. So it's the gamut in between. And of course, the sophisticated tribes, they look at the BIA and they're like, oh, you guys need to bump it up, you know? Then you got the ones over here on this end that are just like, oh man, we need all the help we can get because we just can't do this. So just running that gamut and trying to reach all of them and trying to figure out, you know, for my region, I'm really the only GIS person. I have a couple people, employees that are, one's a hydrologist, he uses GIS. One's an environmental person, he uses GIS. Some of the fire people use GIS, but we really don't have like GIS specialists under me or cartotechs or anything. So right now it's just me. So it's just, I've only been in this position about 2.5 years. So these positions were created in 2020 during the pandemic. And so we're kind of just now realizing the opportunity that exists and how do we tackle that. So we've created, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is the RGCs. So we did create a National Geospatial Committee, and it's composed of the 12 RGCs, and then we have BOGs, and we just recently amended our charter to bring GDev and DRIZ in, and then outside folks as subject matter experts. And under this NGC, we created a charter, National Geospatial Committee charter, but then from that, we created a geospatial integration plan. We're now working on data standard development and bringing in subject matter experts, because it's always good to, instead of just creating a data standard for GIS, to know how the subject matter experts want to use the data, what they need, make sure we integrate that into our data standardization. So the vision, as you can see, is to provide a foundation to build products, services, training, and workflows. And then the mission is to guide the strategic application of GIS technology and facilitate collaboration between the Bureau and the tribes. So underneath the NGC, we have the data stewardship, DRIZ, BOGs, geospatial integration plan, and then the NGC is the foundation for all of that. So one thing I wanted to highlight too, especially since this is a I came about being at this presentation because of the NOAA Coastal Geotools conference that some of you are at. So I was invited to present here. So this information that's coming up is relevant, I think, for this group as well. And that is that BIA has a separate tribal climate-sea resilience group, and they work closely with tribes. And they were structured a little bit differently than the RGCs. I think they learned from some of the things that when the RGCs were brought on board, I think that they learned a little bit about how to kind of make things better for the TCR group. And so they put some more structure in place, whereas like right now with RGCs, they kind of went backward and then created DRIZ and kind of worked from that. But the TCR, they set it up really, really well up front. And so Tribal Climate Resilience has really good hands-on contact with tribes to give information like technical assistance and financial assistance, getting out the grant opportunities, working with the tribes and the native villages. And then they also have a network of liaisons that are made up from the tribes. And so they really incorporated that dynamic of collaboration and working together to make this successful. So I wanted to give you that information if you didn't have it, because it's really relevant to this group, I think. So with that, I just want to say wado. And if you have questions, this is my email. You can always email me, ask me information. Even if it's outside of my region, I'll get you in, contact with the correct people. And thank you.
Hello, everybody. Bit of feedback. I'm here to talk about the Indigenous Traditional Knowledge Database that we've been working at Ecotrust, a tool for supporting native digital archiving. I also want to send a thank out to our hosts, the coordinators, and all of you for joining today. So my name is Ryan Hodges. I'm the Director of Software Development at Ecotrust. I intended to present this along with my colleague, Carson, who is our Tribal Network Strategist. He was unable to join today. He will be presenting his portion through some hastily recorded interview sessions, but a little bit, he is a Chipmaidene person enrolled at the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. And then our company, Ecotrust, we are a social and environmental nonprofit that is working at the intersection of people and place, and we've been doing so in the Pacific Northwest for over 30 years, based in Portland, Oregon. So, what is the Indigenous Traditional Knowledge Database? First and foremost, it's a web application built to support digital archiving, including data entry, data curation, and data browsing. It, of course, has a whole host of additional features, including robust GIS interaction, and support for multiple languages, including native languages. In building such a tool, relationships are incredibly important. We started with a relational database, which is a common form of databases that helped get at the relationships piece, but over the years, we have really honed that schema to specifically focus on relationships themselves, putting emphasis on the interconnection between the various records rather than on the records themselves. What it is not a tool for collecting data for governments and commercial interests. And I know there's a lot of interest and talk about including traditional knowledge in planning processes, but it is our belief, and I believe the philosophy of this tool, that that information is to be shared at the discretion of the tribes themselves. So it is not an improvement or even a replacement for oral tradition. That has been doing parallel work to this for thousands of years, and I see no reason to replace that. It is also not for any one tribe or person's exploitation or profit. So a little bit about why we built this. And I want to put emphasis on we because it is a project, yes, of Ecotrust, but in collaboration with numerous partners, mostly tribal, and in particular, the Tolowa-Deni Nation of Smith River, California. And a little bit of history about the tool. So the Tolowa-Deni Nation originally built and worked with a contractor to build what was called the Marine Traditional Ethnographic Knowledge Database. It was built using Microsoft Access, which had its limitations, shall we say. And it resulted in a start, but kind of a non-intuitive and non-helpful process that the data archivists were really struggling to work with. So we came in to build it into a big web application on a modern platform with many upgrades, including to the visibility, or usability, the interface to smooth out all the workflow issues that they were having entering data into the old tool, and on a whole to overhaul the user experience to encourage data entry, curation, and data access among tribal members. For some of its impact on communities, to talk about its role with communities, I'm going to turn this over to my partner, Carson. And let's see.
So the impact that this could have on the work going on in community, a lot of it centers around rematriation and working with knowledge and teachings in a way that's compatible with the way that the community keeps teachings and practices going. So in terms of rematriation, the archive is a centralized place where the community can care for materials that were taken out of the community, and in a lot of instances, were locked away in archives that pretty consistently denied access to tribal communities, and also had a lot of bias in the way that those materials were written down by ethnographers and anthropologists who held a lot of bigoted views about Native people. So kind of building in that piece of not just taking the digital copies of those archival materials back and storing them somewhere, but also putting them in conversation with the other work in cultural continuance and cultural education that's going on in the community. One, it allows the tribe to, or a tribe to play a stronger role in caring for their own history and stories and being in control of how that's presented to the wider world. And then two, it can act as, a support for cultural education by offering additional insights. And it also provides elders and knowledge bearers who are alive today the opportunity to recontextualize and correct things that have been misrepresented in those materials. And then the database also gives the opportunity to archive contemporary materials. So it's a way that the community can care for what's being shared by elders and knowledge bearers today alongside what's been shared in the past, and really provide a space where archives can be run by tribal communities and run according to Native values to meet the goals of the community.
Again, I'm going to turn this over to Carson for a little bit to talk about the impacts the tool has had and is continuing to have with the communities using it.
Some of the impacts that can have are really variable. I mean, it depends on the focal point for the community, and the archive is intended to serve as a long-term space. So some of the ways that the ITK database is plugging into initiatives in partner communities right now include cultural education, land stewardship, so contributing new or rediscovering specific insights around land stewardship practices that may have been marginalized or are not known by many people in the community anymore. For example, traditional burns on the West Coast are a really important management technique that was essentially outlawed for more than a century. And so the community is carrying forward both oral history, contemporary practice, and looking through older stories and archival documents to kind of help them triangulate as folks are carrying out that practice more. It's also being used for land acquisition. There's a rich amount of information about traditionally important places that can be stored within the database, and that can help tribal departments evaluate how to prioritize getting land back and how to prioritize, stewardship of lands that the tribe does have and is taken care of. And then it can also be used to support scientific work that's going on at tribal natural resource departments in a way that incorporates the perspectives of traditional stewardship alongside providing an accessible place to store, say, monitoring data about a traditionally important place. Internally, I think the database is providing a digital space for tribal staff to work more closely together across different kind of focal areas, education, natural resource management, cultural practice, wellness, and care for a community, and kind of bring perspective on archiving that is allowing the tribe running it to really have their values and priorities around how to care for knowledge be at the forefront of the ways that it's used. What it can mean for external collaboration is a resource for tribal staff to advocate more loudly and more effectively to the government and other external potential partners about just how much stake that tribal communities have in their homelands. And I think it can act as a resource for tribes who are navigating, say, co-management agreements to really bring to those conversations more perspectives from within their community about the importance of that place, to really demonstrate irrefutably the rights and responsibilities that tribal communities have to take care of their homelands.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we built it. And I want to emphasize the we being Ecotrust and the Tolowa Dene Nation and other partners. Namely, we wanted to maximize accessibility and work to lower any requirements or expectations that would otherwise be placed on our tribal partners. And some of those include open source, which means it's free, it's documented, so any tribe can pick it up and make it their own without having to deal with us or anyone else. And it's fully customizable so that if there is something that doesn't work for them or something else they need, they can add it. It also needed to be lightweight. Not all tribes have the privilege of internal IT departments and servers that they can spin up a web server for this product on. So, there's options where they could go to the cloud and run this for under $30 a month, or it's lightweight enough it could run on a $35 Raspberry Pi microcomputer. We wanted to make it region agnostic, so away went the absolute marine focus of it so that it hopefully can support teams all over the world, and I would love to see that tested out more. We also understand that climate's changed, the environment is changing, people are changing with it, and because of that, the data will need to change over time too. So we implemented version histories and versioning so that those could be tracked and handled. And finally, privacy. The tool is open source, but tribal data is proprietary. It is not for us to have, it's not for anyone but the tribe to have without their explicit decision to share anything. A little bit about who is using it. As mentioned, we continue to collaborate closely with the Tolowa Dene Nation. In all, we've already deployed with 5 different tribal partners across the West Coast. We are currently in collaboration with 2 more at various levels of that. And that has allowed us to support a broad variety of tribal entities from individual tribes to confederated tribes, including those that have been recognized and those that have not. What we have learned, and this time by we, I just mean Ecotrust. So I will, once again, hand this one over to Carson to talk a little bit about tribal data sovereignty.
One lesson that we've learned partnering with tribes on the West Coast to create iterations of this database for their community is that returning materials to tribal communities empowers the perspectives of those communities. And one of the damaging things that happened from all of those ethnographic archival materials getting taken away was that at the same time, the community's voice and perspective about, in many Native communities, our voice and perspective about our own history has been marginalized and doubted. And so asserting a place as folks responsible for keeping track of our history and our contemporary practice and the materials associated with that has the potential to really empower the perspective of the tribe. Unfortunately, it's not as obvious as it should be that, you know, like at Siletz, we are the experts on our own history. And I think that's true for every tribal community, and that's a lesson that I hope more people in the public are learning as they see these kind of efforts. Another really major lesson is around data sovereignty. You know, governments and private institutions, frankly, are not doing a good enough job of supporting tribal data sovereignty. We need to do a better job. That can be as simple as fundraising in a way that doesn't obligate tribes to share information, but it comes down to values of prioritizing collaboration over extraction and really advocating for the perspective of our tribal partners as far as their right and responsibility to steward and take care of the teachings and the knowledge in their community in the ways that they see fit. And that data sovereignty piece is an ongoing conversation that is really made more difficult by the way that intellectual property law is talked about in the US today. And so another lesson I think learned is that perspectives from tribal communities about how to take care of knowledge from those communities need to be respected.
Anyway, in our time in working with tribes as a non-native institution, we've learned coming in, you cannot assume trust from the beginning. If you're having troubles connecting with and making relationships with tribes as a non-native entity like ours, it might be a good idea to start working with Indigenous-led organizations and kind of building up that trust. Also understanding that when you do enter into a relationship with tribes, it's not just a short-term partnership, it is a long-term relationship, and that's what is expected. As Dr. Miranda Bernard said this morning, it takes time to build meaningful relationships with people. Yeah, you'll be expected to show up, check in regularly, and be sure to listen with anything they share and fully understand it. I have a quick note here about land acknowledgements are catching on. We had a nice one in a moment of silence this morning. Ecotrust also has a list of a call to action for people who want to take more specific things. That link will be available in the notes afterwards. And with that, thank you for joining us. There's a live demo of the tool at demo.itkdb.org. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you very much. It was really, really wonderful presentation. So we're going to pull back up Kelsey to the table for some concluding remarks. So when we come here, we'll conclude our panel. I remind folks online that if you do have questions, please do put them online, and if we don't get to them, we certainly will capture them and follow up. So please, I encourage you, regardless, to share your questions with us, because we will incorporate them into our follow-up actions. And if anybody, if we have a few minutes, if anybody in the audience, please be ready to come down and ask your questions as well. So if you are ready, willing, and able, Kelsey, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful, awesome.
Your volume is not quite working. Let's just double check that. Thankfully, we have IT people. Are we good to go? Let's see if we can try that again.
Can you hear me? Nope. They can hear me online.
Recording in progress.
Yes, can hear it, Kelsey.
Okay, try now. Let's see.
There we go. Lovely. Thank you very much. Loud and clear.
Love the technology. It fits with this session for today. So, hello. It's good to be with you all today. I'm Dr. Kelsey Leonard. I am on the steering committee for the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean. As was mentioned by some of my co-panelists today, I've also was a former tribal co-lead when we had the regional planning body. So I've been involved with this sphere of influence that we call ourselves that for quite some time, and I'm really excited to be a part of the forum this year, and really fortunate to be able to provide some closing remarks on the discussion from the panelists that were presented today. Again, just thank you so much to Karl for kicking us off in a good way and updating us on all of the wonderful work that we have been able to do with the Marco Data Portal in, gosh, over 10 years, I guess, or so now. So with that, it's been really exciting, and I think as you saw from what Karl shared earlier, the native land digital mapping interface is one that is used globally around the world, not only to orient folks to how to potentially do a land acknowledgement, because you can't do a land acknowledgement if you don't know what land you're occupying, but now it's being utilized for so many more aspects of engagement and learning, and really fostering continuous learning in individuals and organizations and entities around the world. And so it was a really great opportunity to work with them, and to have the data portal team reach out to Native Land Digital and just to be able to create those partnerships, because we don't need to be just collecting data to collect data. If it exists out there, figuring out how to streamline partnerships is really important to just the, you can kind of see here, some of these data principles that exist out in the world of having it be findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, right? We should be making data that is reusable in other interfaces. And so if that exists, that's where it then begs the question for us to create those great partnerships. And I think what Karl also said earlier for folks that were listening in, was around the ocean stories, some of the impetus for the creation of those, as many of the co-panelists also mentioned today, is that, for Indigenous peoples, data is not a static or inanimate entity within our lives. Data is actually relational, it's living, it's about the reciprocity that it creates and the responsibilities that it imbues. And so with that, when we're thinking about the ocean stories, we said, we don't just exist in ones and twos. We need to, or spatial plots. We need to actually have that oral tradition come through in the portal. And so that was through song and through recordings and through those oral testimonies. And so it's really been great to see those, and looking forward to seeing more as the portal continues to grow. And I think, it also is really important that we understand the portal to be community driven, to be region driven. One of the things that wasn't mentioned was actually the new data that we have on the portal around marine mammal stranding data. It was an idea that sort of, was put forward, and folks kind of were like, oh, I don't know if this is doable. And then they work their magic like they always do. And they made it happen. But actually the impetus for me even bringing that forward was because tribal leaders in the region said, we want to know more about marine mammal strandings and how can we see that visually and geospatially represented. And as I said, the data team at Marco made that happen. Deborah, I just wanted to thank you as well for your comments, and also showing how just in, every year, this is the ecosystems of data governance are growing and expanding. And the resources that you mentioned that are now available through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and with the regional geospatial coordinators, I'm just really excited to see in 5 years from now, the work that will emerge from that. You talked about just sort of looking 5 years back, or even just, when you all were brought in 3 years ago during the middle of a global pandemic. Now that we're sort of able to really, get your teeth into things, I think it's going to be really exciting to see how you're able to optimize and streamline services. And I really also love the approach that you're taking, that in recognizing that to empower tribes for data management and data governance means that we have to build capacity. It means, also providing access to software and licenses. These are things that sometimes don't actually get talked about. The monetization of data, the monetization of data software systems, they can be exclusionary to many communities, especially Indigenous peoples, if that access is not provided. And I think, as well, Ryan, to what you said of what Ecotrust is doing is really trying to break down those cost measures that exclude communities from being able to participate in digital systems. So just really excited again to see where your work goes, Deborah. I'm sure I'll be one of those folks emailing you from the Eastern region, but looking forward to that. And then I think Carson was a recording, but Carson, just thank you for all the work that you do and for your voice and for the project. It was really great to hear about your work and to hear how the impact that it's having, as well as the broader impacts that it has for other tribes around the country who are working to do similar activities in their regions. And then to Ryan and Ecotrust, I think, with these data platforms, we're really, you emphasize the need, when we looked at the pilot or the beta site that was created, you have highlighted for us as a community in this forum today that data platforms, they are not stagnant, and they can't be stagnant. You can't just create one and be like, okay, it goes and lives in some internet archive if we're lucky for the rest of its life. It has to be maintained. It has to be modernized. Technology evolves. The platform has to evolve. And that also requires financial resources. It requires even not even just financial resources, but the capacity to build the new technology to meet the optimization standards of the time that we're in. So I think it's really great that Ecotrust put their, their money where their mouth is, so to say, and in providing those supports to tribes. And I hope others are able to do that as well. And ultimately, this all circles around to valuing Indigenous data sovereignty, which I think is, what you shared in your presentation and what I have here behind me. I thought I'd put that up on the screen. For those that are unfamiliar with the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, they developed the CARE principles. If you're data wonks, like some of the panelists and myself, you know about the FAIR principles, which are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But the CARE principles are Indigenous data governance principles that, if adopted and operationalized, lead to Indigenous data sovereignty. They stand for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And so to those panelists who I feel are already doing this, but to those in the audience who may be unfamiliar, we hope that today's panel inspired you to be fair and care. So, Tabuhi, thank you, and I'll turn it back to you, Tony.
So I appreciate it very much. Really, an incredibly rich panel. I really just so much good information, but a lot of takeaways to think about. Really, to me, it's not learning from the past, but maybe the future needs to, the past has a lot to be, that we need to catch up with the past to some extent. I mean, really this concept of data sovereignty is one that really puts it in a broader context that I think really maybe is not something that our data managers typically think about. So really appreciate everybody putting this in a context of data's not just information, it's communication, and it's only one aspect of what needs to be a long, ongoing process of communication and trust building. So again, very, very rich conversation. I don't know if we have are there any questions online that we need to get to? Why don't we go there, because I know that I don't see anybody here. We don't have much time, so we'll just have one or two questions. Thanks.
Two quick ones.
Great.
If a new region wants to configure, this is for Ecotrust. If a new region wants to configure an online tool, what's the best first step?
Do I want red or green? There. Am I live?
Yep.
All right. I would say there was a link at the end of the slideshow, github.com/ecotrust/tekdb. That has documentation for getting started there. Also, if you have any questions, please reach out to Ecotrust. We can get you started too.
And all the presentations will be posted online afterwards, and we will do a summary of the report. So again, you can follow up with anybody at Marco as well to sort of follow up on any of these contacts if you miss them. Another question?
The other one is really quickly, what data are currently available online for public use?
Who was that directed to?
Well, I guess anyone other than Karl, who walked us through what the portal has.
Thanks.
So I guess I'll take that one. For the BIA, no, we don't have any public-facing data yet. We're getting there, but there definitely is protection that we need to put in place. And then also there's going to be like a need-to-know basis. And then, like I said before, tribal consultation, data sovereignty, just trying to work through all of those things to see what should be public-facing and what should not. So for Bureau of Indian Affairs, there isn't at this point.
Great, thanks. Anybody else have anything? We're good? All right, again, these folks will be here during the break, so you can ask them your questions if you're in the audience. Thanks very much for joining us, a really fantastic session, so another round of applause for all of our presenters. Thank you, Kelsey. I'm sorry you're not here in person. And we do have a break now. It's a little short, in about 10 minutes, a little bit more than that, so please everybody be back in the room at 2:45. So thank you very much.